Hey guys, Liquid here, and today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man, as I have been known to do on this channel. But today, instead of a video game, we're actually going to be talking about a book, which is the novelization of Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man, which I read a little while back. And as I was reading it, I sort of noticed that, I started making note of little differences and whatnot, and started to basically. I decided that it could be a nice little video to go through all of them, and I do have quite a few. So I won't be talking about literally every difference because that would just take too long, but I will be going into a little bit of detail about, like, even some sort of minor stuff. And the first few scenes are actually scenes that are completely new to the book and not in the movie, so I don't have any like stills or whatever to show, so you'll just have to bear with the picture of the poster or whatever I'm showing right now. But one thing I do need to get out of the way, and this will undoubtedly make a lot of people cringe, but a big part of the reason that I read this book in the first place, I read this in Japanese. People I have talked about on my channel before, that studying Japanese is a hobby of mine, and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is a movie I know. I know almost every line from the back of my hand or whatever. So I just figured it'd be a good idea to read in Japanese or whatever and get some reading practice or whatever. And so some of the notes that I've taken are comments on the way certain things were translated. So, the main point of this is just to kind of go through and look at how the novel differs from the movie. But I will at sometimes be talking about, like, Japanese language specific stuff, like, oh man, they use this word for this thing, or there's little translation choices that I thought were interesting. I will be commenting on. So I just wanted to get that out there. But number one is that we open up on a scene of a bunch of like hoodlums or whatever driving recklessly and drunk through a graveyard, and then out of nowhere a costumed figure, a red and blue costumed figure, comes out, scares them away, and then that costumed figure goes up to one of the graves and basically starts talking to the grave, and that's where we commence. I guess what in the movie was the whole, who am I? You sure you want to know? Speech. So, assuming that the grave is supposed to be Uncle Ben's grave, I guess it's like, you could almost consider the entire story as like being narrated by Peter to Uncle Ben almost. And I have it here. He also there's like an added sort of bit where he's like, at first, he says, like, this story was about a girl, and then he says, at first there was no girl, that there was just sadness, loss, and spiders. Number two, I have that it starts, I guess after that first scene, we have Peter being accepted into his aunt and uncle's house after his parents' death, and his parents actually come into play a lot more in this novelization than they did in the Raimi trilogy. Because in the Raimi movies, his parents are like mentioned offhand a couple times, like, I know I'm not your father, or whatever, or your parents must be proud, Peter or Norman to Peter, but his parents really don't have any sort of role in the Raimi trilogy, but here they actually get quite a bigger part. But yeah, so Peter comes in to Aunt May and Uncle Ben's place, and Uncle Ben is trying to explain, your parents. He tells him his parents died in a car crash, and he tells them, and he tells them, Peter, your parents, they went to be with God, Peter. And there's a lot more like explicit religious references like that. We'll get to later. Aside from like the only like there's some vague stuff in the movies like I think like the most explicit thing is like Eddie Brock praying for Spider-Man to die or whatever. And Peter, when he hears, Uncle Ben his aunt and uncle telling him about his parents, because they had told him that they died in a plane crash, and he basically says, it wasn't an accident, and he holds up a comic book and insists that they were spies that were killed by the Red Skull, which I guess you could technically kind of say is another little Marvel reference there. And then when they get to Peter's room, this is number 3. Uncle Ben sees a spider in the corner, and basically explains, he tells Peter that it's a roommate. He has a little roommate, and it'll protect him from, bad insects like mosquitoes. And he says, maybe my brother or your father sent it to protect you. And Peter replies, I thought only kids had brothers, which I thought was kind of a funny line. And then we have a sort of extended scene where Norman Osborn and J. Jonah Jameson actually meet up at a gentleman's club. Like they go to the same gentleman's club, and they basically have a bit of a discussion, debate about what it means to be a hero. With obviously JJ has very high standards. Heroes need to be heroic all the time and whatnot. Heroes need to do all this stuff. And Norman basically, laments, feels bad for heroes. He says, even if a hero were to exist, he'd just be taken down by, newspapers like yours, Jonah. And he even says, there was a hero 2,000 years ago. Many loved him. Or like he says, he doesn't say there was a hero. He says like there was a man with some heroic qualities 2,000 years ago. Many loved him, many hated him. And if he were alive today, would you support him, or would you be first in line to put him on the cross? Like basically Norman Osborn asking J. Jonah Jameson if he would crucify Jesus, which is kind of hilarious. And I think JJJ doesn't really answer. He kind of like notices that people are kind of watching, and just kind of looks back at his newspaper. And then number 5, we have okay, that previous one was number 4. This one I have as number 5. Here's something I guess we're actually getting scenes that were in the movie. Peter actually, I guess during the little dream sequence where Peter's DNA is like being changed and whatnot, Peter actually hears the spider saying "great power," like sort of like a premonition, which is kind of funny. Number 6, Peter wakes up and grabs a bunch of food before leaving for school. This is like when he runs downstairs all rejuvenated. Yeah, I think like he takes a bunch of like food off like Uncle Ben's plate, and Peter says, don't start with that. Like Uncle Ben explains, hey Michelangelo, don't be late. We're painting the house, we're painting the kitchen. And Peter says, don't start without me. But Uncle Ben does not actually reply, don't start up with me. There's a little difference. Peter had taken a bunch of food off of Uncle Ben's plate. And after Peter runs out the door, Uncle Ben looks to Aunt May and says, he took my bacon," which could have made for a funny scene, like a funny line in the movie. Like you have that right before cut to the next scene. And I also have that there's some sort of emphasis on the stickiness of Peter's socks when he's getting dressed. I think like it's implied that he put a hole in his socks trying to take his socks off because his feet were so sticky, which is kind of a sad problem to have. Next up, we have no Peter talking to MJ on the way to school. Like I guess there's the scene very early in the movie where both Peter and MJ are like kind of walking to the school, to the bus stop, and Peter's kind of like, "Hey MJ, how's it going, MJ?" Trying to psych himself up or something. But that scene was not in the book, in the novelization. Okay, this is number 8. Peter. Okay, in the movie, Peter. We have that whole scene where Peter kind of discovers that he can climb walls. Like it's kind of like a very emotional moment where he looks at his hands, he looks at the wall. It's like this a big realization. In the book, however, after he rips off the poster or flag or whatever it is on the bus, and he's just kind of mesmerized looking at his hands. And while he's looking at his hands, a car comes by, and he jumps out of the way to avoid the car and sticks to a wall. And while he's still on the wall, some innocent lady, is just reaching out the window to water her plants that are on the window, and screams at him, basically. Next up, this is number 9. Mary Jane. In the movie, you have the scene where Mary Jane slips on orange juice. I used to think it was some sort of soup, but looking back at it, you can very clearly see an orange juice carton. But in the book, she actually slips on milk, which very very minor thing, but I thought that was worth noting. And this is number 10. During the whole commotion, where after Peter sends his lunch tray into Flash or whatever, Peter's very worried about his classmates possibly seeing his wrists. They'll think, and this is actually I guess gonna get kind of graphic here, but Peter is afraid that his classmates are going to think that he cut himself or tried to hurt himself or something. And then there's another line that's well, considering Flash Thompson's after him, I guess it's not the weirdest thing after all. And I guess when after Peter throws the tray, it's not immediately clear to Flash that it was Peter that threw it. There's a scene in the movie where he kind of walks out the room, and Flash is kind of bewildered. Flash's surprise is described as being basically greater than if he were to find out that Peter was actually Britney Spears, his alter ego, like Britney Spears in a disguise. And during the fight, or whatever, in the movie, Peter throws the tray, and the tray hits Flash's back, and there's no food that really gets onto anywhere else. But in the book, it actually mentions that Flash wipes ketchup off his eyebrows, which is kind of interesting. And when Peter punches Flash, Flash is sent into the lockers and actually is bloodied. He actually took quite a beating. I think at first, before Peter notices the blood, Peter just thinks Flash is being all dramatic, like some sort of Spanish soap opera. And then this is number 13. I haven't been listing all the numbers, but I'm just kind of listing the numbers as we go, just for my own sake, basically. Mary Jane's father, Mary Jane's parents actually have something of a not a big role, but they actually have they actually have some sort of existence, some sort of presence in the book. And once word gets out that Flash lost the fight to Peter, Mary Jane's father basically is offering Mary Jane to teach Flash how to fight. He's like, you think I'm joking? Back in school, I was the All-American. Like he's I guess he was some sort of boxer or whatever in the old days, and he wants to teach Flash how to fight, basically. To which Mary Jane is like, "Oh no, you can't do that." And can have this for number 14, when Mary Jane runs out of her house to get some air or whatever. In the movie, Peter walks outside with a bag of trash, with a trash bag, and he's like, "Oh, I was just taking out the trash." And kind of use that, and kind of uses that as an excuse, sort of. In the book, Peter actually doesn't have any trash with him. He's literally just out there listening to Mary Jane fighting with her parents, whatever. But he still tries to use the trash excuse. He's like, I wasn't listening. I was just taking out the trash. And then Mary Jane notices, hey, he doesn't actually have any trash. I have for number 15, I have there's a bit where Aunt May and Uncle Ben are fighting over the TV. Aunt May wants to watch a program on silk moths on the Discovery Channel, and Ben wants to watch baseball, and he's yelling at the baseball or whatever. There's a comment that basically talks about how Peter is worried that Mary Jane will somehow get into prostitution. Yeah, basically, he's talking about Mary Jane's future and how she has such a great future ahead of her. She'd be good at anything. And then he's like, oh wait, actually, I hope she doesn't get into the world's oldest profession. And for number 17, I have that Peter is jealous at Flash for getting his a car for his birthday, and remembers the time that he got a balaclava as a birthday present, or as some sort of bonus for a birthday present or something like that. And that balaclava would actually become the mask that Peter uses for the human spider costume. And this is one thing I forgot to mention. This is like a very common recurring theme throughout the book, the novelization. After every chapter, after a lot of main events or whatever, we have these sections where Peter is writing a letter to his parents. I think this happened in the very beginning when Uncle Ben tells Peter the truth about his parents. He gives Peter a notebook and he's like, hey, anytime you want to talk to your parents, write in here. And so after every chapter or so, you get Peter writing to his parents, kind of giving his thoughts on the recent chapter. And there's a bit here where Peter basically tells his parents that he would trade his powers for them, which is quite touching. Okay, and here we have number 18. Okay, here's something from this. This might be unique to the Japanese version that I read, but for Norman Osborn's line of 40,000 years of human evolution and we've barely matched human potential or whatever it is. In the Japanese version that I was reading, that only said 4,000 years. Instead of 40,000, it said 4,000, which very well may be a printing error, typing error, or something, but that did stick out to me, so I thought I would make note of it. Number 19, the wrestling lady. I think in the movie she's played by Octavia Spencer is her name. In the book, however, she's played by some blonde lady. I guess they hadn't. I'm guessing that they hadn't decided an actor at that point, so he's just the author of the of the novelization just made her some blonde lady. And you have Aunt May. During the whole wrestling scene, Aunt May and Uncle Ben actually watch on TV. Ben is like a big wrestling fan. And here's something that is honestly just kind of crazy that this is in here. But when Bonesaw gets introduced, Bonesaw McGraw, Aunt May asks Uncle Ben, is Bonesaw his real? Is that his real name? I don't think she doesn't ask, is Bonesaw his real name? She just says, is that his real name? To which Ben answers, and I'm not even joking here. Ben explains that his real name is Bonesaw Leibovitz, but he changed it to McGraw to avoid anti-Semitism. I'm not even joking. That's in the novelization of Spider-Man, which was pretty. Like, that was a bro moment. I have there's a fan in the audience who's like claiming that Bonesaw, it's all special, like it's all effects, like it's all fake. Bonesaw isn't actually as good as he looks. To which Bonesaw runs over and punches him in the face. And during Uncle Ben and Aunt May watching the wrestling, May's constantly saying, "Oh, we'll turn it off." And there's also some funny comments like, "Who raises that?" Like after Spider-Man, after the Human Spider comes out, Aunt May and Uncle Ben are all like, "Who raised that boy? What type of house did he grow up in to get into all this?" And Aunt May even realizes, "Hey, that mask looks like the balaclava that I gave Peter that one year. I wonder if he got it as a present as well." After the promoter gets robbed, the wrestling promoter gets robbed, it's implied. It says that his face is actually like swollen. I guess like from when the robber hits him, and when he's running away, he in the English version, in the movie, he looks at Peter and says, "Hey, thanks," and just leaves it at that. But again, this is something I also should notice. That I did on occasion look up the English version of the novelization just to like fact check some things, like some acronyms and whatnot, and some like and stuff like that. But I noticed in the Japanese version, the robber refers to Peter as Wakaino, which literally just means like young one. He basically says, "Thanks, young one." So I checked the English version just like see like what the English novelization said, and in the English version he says, "Thanks, pal," which is kind of interesting. And apparently Peter leaves the promoter's room, after he says, "I missed the part where that's my problem." He leaves the room while humming, which is kind of funny. And once Peter realizes who Ben's killer is, there's like the second he realizes, like it instantly cuts to like another one of those moments of Peter writing a letter to his parents, like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, you won't believe what happened today." But and it also mentions that like once he the moment he realizes, like his spirit falls into hell basically. And Peter prays on a gargoyle, like he's like, I can see, he prays as a gargoyle, and he tells his parents to ask God if he's happy for all he's done. Like, hey, like, did this make you happy? And now we're on the scene where the General Slocum is talking to. Is meeting with people from Quest Aerospace, and they're showing off their technology. Which this scene here, some of this might have been in the movie, but honestly, as a kid, all the military stuff just kind of went over my head, and I never really, and it was kind of boring to me, so I never really, this part isn't as like ingrained in my memory as much. But Slocum stalling the Quest Aerospace, and before the test, and they're talking about how I hope no gremlins mess this up. And like Slocum talks about how back in the old days, back in World War II, the pilots used to blame mechanical difficulties on gremlins. They used to say like gremlins got in the plane or something. And then, what do you know? The ultimate gremlin comes along as the Green Goblin. And the project that they're working on, like the big white suit, is called the Badger, which apparently stands for Ballistic All Defense Guerrilla Explorer Recon. But some people shorten it to just badass gear, or like some people. There's like a folk etymology that Badger is like short for badass gear or whatever. And the Goblin is described as when the Badger explodes, the Goblin is basically described as looking like a demon being vomited out of a techno hell. It was kind of a poetic imagery. And the Goblin shouts, "Badger, we don't need those things. Like we don't need no." Like the actual like English version, he says, "We don't need no stinking badgers." And I'm not sure if this is actually how it was in the original English version, but just to like fact check the English version, I would occasionally go on to, because like I found a version that was on sometimes you can like find books on Google Books, but like you can't see the whole thing, or like sometimes there might be typos. But when Goblin says stinking badgers, stinking is spelled, instead of an I, it uses two E's. So it's STEEINKEEING. Stinking badgers. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then there's a scene where Mary Jane visits Harry at his apartment. And we get like clips. I say clips, but it's a book. But bits of Harry and Mary Jane bonding together are interspersed with a montage of Spider-Man doing his thing. And there's a very funny sequence where Harry is mentioned as reading An Interview with a Vampire, which is like a book. I've never read it or seen the movie, so I'm not sure what it's about. But Harry asks Mary Jane, "Have you read it?" And Mary Jane says, "No, but I've seen the movie, and the girl was a little creepy." Which, if people don't know, Interview with a Vampire, there was a film adaptation in I think the late 1990s, and the girl, the female protagonist, or I'm not entirely sure what her role was, but she's played by none other than Kirsten Dunst. So it's kind of an interesting little, fourth wall break, you could say here. Okay, next up we actually have a little Marvel reference, as during the whole montage of Spider-Man doing his Spidey stuff, one of the cops comes across some webbed up criminals and basically says, "Oh, hey, at least it's not like that guy, and at least it's not like in New Mexico when guys are getting beaten up by the Hulk." And the way they write Hulk in the Japanese version, I'll just explain, is they have like the characters. Basically, there's kind of like a phenomenon in Japanese where you can write a word. You can write like a word in the kanji, in the Chinese characters, and in order to show people how to read it, you'll have some text above it, and when you do that, it's called furigana. But the furigana, you can kind of play with it sometimes, and like all authors, just kind of to be artistic or poetic, will sometimes give fake furigana to words, and this is it's called something called gikun. And for the Hulk here, they have the word kyojin, which means giant, basically. People who watch anime might be familiar with Attack on Titan. The title in Japanese is Shingeki no Kyojin, and the Titans are referred to as kyojin. And so Hulk here, and so in the English version of Spider-Man here, we have the word kyojin, and above it is haruku, which is how you would say Hulk in Japanese. So Hulk is basically being likened to like a giant or a titan or whatever, which is kind of cool. Next up, Mary Jane and Harry eat at some fancy restaurant. Mary Jane's like, oh man, I'd come here to see Peter, but I ended up going on a date with Harry. And during the montage with Spider-Man, I guess like we get where in the movie, it was like a big montage of a bunch of like different interviews with people. Like that's when you got like, my wife saw him building a nest in the Lincoln fountain or whatever it was. But there's like an extra line here where someone says, his wife will notice that he's been using her tights, basically implying that Spider-Man, I think it's kind of like you would often, when people talk about Superman, he was like, he wears tights, he wears underwear or whatever. Okay, next up we have a kind of an interesting scene where Peter, in the movie, there's a line where Peter basically mentions that he was fired by Dr. Connors, which might confuse some people because, Peter's never mentioned as working or doing anything like that. But I guess the implication is that I guess he was working as a lab assistant for Dr. Connors, who was also, I guess, a teacher of his. And here we actually get to see Peter being fired by Dr. Connors. And, I guess, just he's fired for, like, constantly being late for work and whatnot. And there's also a little extra bit where Dr. Connors is carrying an iguana in a cage. And Peter, out of spite, basically just wishes that the iguana would break out of the cage and bite Dr. Connors and turn him into some sort of lizard man. In the movie, Mary Jane is like working at some sort of cafe. I think like the Moon Dance Cafe, and Peter like manages to run into her while she's getting off work one day, and in the background it shows that the sign says Moon Dance, but the inn is kind of like the inn is burned out on the neon sign, and so it just says Moo Dance, and he's like, I want. This doesn't look like a cafe. It looks like some place that cows would come to dance, which is kind of funny. Next up, during the scene where like Harry's like Storm and Norman has been on the phone all day, Peter, like where Norman's been on his cell phone. Peter sees Norman using his cell phone and basically suddenly remembers, hey, like. Remember when there was all that fuss about cell phones causing cancer? Like, why don't people talk about that anymore? And then like he says something like, maybe I should get one to kill my stress. Like implying it's like that the cell phone would like eat away at his brain and make him less stress free. And here we have yet another interesting Marvel reference. So. The guy who, got beaten up by Bonesaw and was like rolled away on a stretcher screaming, "Oh, I can't feel my legs." That guy is actually, limping down the street or whatever and witnesses bank robbers come out of a building. and lo and behold, Spider-Man comes to save the day. And then that guy who witnessed it or whatever runs to a payphone to call his son, and it turns out his son is none other than Matt Murdock. And that guy was actually basically the Daredevil's father. And he's like, hey son, you won't believe what I just saw. This Daredevil, he came out of nowhere. He refers to Spider-Man and as a Daredevil. Okay, and so now we move on to the World Unity Festival. Now in the movie, the singer is I think Macy Gray is the singer, but I think here it's just implied. She's just some singer that Peter had never seen before, which is leave it open, leave it very ambiguous, so that the movie can fill. I'm basically implying, hey, we haven't decided the singer we want. And it's implied that she sings pop in a soul style. And Peter's taking, I guess, Peter's there, he's like taking pictures and everything. And he uses his spider sense. It's mentioned that he uses his spider sense to avoid all the people, because there's so many people, so many crowds of people. He uses his spider sense to avoid stepping on people's feet and whatnot. And it's mentioned that I guess what exactly the World Unity Day Festival is. Isn't really mentioned in the movie. It's just kind of like this thing that exists. I think as a kid I probably just thought it was the Thanksgiving Day parade, but it's mentioned that it's some sort of event where all the people of the world gather together, celebrate peace and tradition, different cultures, and people dressed in traditional garb and whatnot, and celebrate the oneness of man. And which I guess it kind of implies in the movie. There's one of the floats is like a giant globe, which I think the giant globe was almost like Hit and Billy, young Billy. There's a bit of a pun here. I'm not entirely sure if this is I'm not sure if I actually fact-checked this part, so I'm not sure if this is in English or just Japanese specific, but I feel like it would make more sense if this was in the English as well. But in the English version, in the movie, when the board members see the Green Goblin approaching, they're like, oh, that's our glider. They use the word glider. But here, in the book that I read, they use the word wing. They say that's our wing. And Mary Jane actually hears that out of earshot and basically says, that's our wing. Which wing do they mean? Do they mean wing as in the wings of a bird, or wings as in the wing of a building? And the way that they handle this in Japanese is first they have the kanji for a bird's wings, and then they have wingu over it, and they have the kanji for the wing of a building, and they have wingu over it, because normally those would be different words in Japanese. And the statues that the goblin destroys are identified as Greek Hercules statues, but Peter comments on them, basically being hey, that's not Hercules, that's Atlas. But then again, I guess Hercules, there was a bit in Greek mythology where Hercules was also the one holding up the earth, so maybe, who knows, or some of that. And there's a bit where when Peter is fighting the goblin, or Spider-Man's fighting the goblin, the goblin gets angry and is like, how dare you mess with my plans? What do you want? And Spider-Man replies, world peace, but I guess I'll just have to be content punching you in the jaw instead. And then next up, for what it's worth, I have this as number 40 in my counting scheme. After Spider-Man drops Mary Jane off in the park and swings away, in the English version, there's it kind of, there's like a couple seconds of like Mary Jane's face, like just like kind of watching in bewilderment, but she doesn't actually say anything. However, in the trailer, if you go back and like look at the trailer, I'm pretty sure like Mary Jane actually like she says "wow," but like they cut that out in the movie. But here, instead of saying "wow," she just says Spider-Man. She says Spider-Man, but I'm not entirely sure if that's. I didn't actually fact check this part, so I'm not sure if that's just in the Japanese version or what. But I thought that was interesting. There's a very sad part where Mary Jane auditions for a play, but the casting director turns her down, tells her she's terrible. But then, once Mary Jane leaves, the casting director gets on the phone, talks to Flash Thompson. Turns out that she's Flash Thompson's aunt, and she just turned Mary Jane down all out of revenge. And she actually says that, hey, you know, Mary Jane, she actually wasn't that bad, but you know, anything for you, Flash Boy. During the scene where Spider-Man saves Mary Jane in the rain, Mary Jane thanks Spider-Man while he's still standing and maskless, and then once he jumps away or whatever, and they have their for them before they have their kiss, it turns out in this version, instead of like Spider-Man kissing Mary Jane upside down, here he actually kisses her while he's stuck to a wall. I guess like stuck to a wall. I'm imagining that's I didn't actually like make the you know, the most detailed of notes here, but I'm guessing that it's like he's kind of upside down on the wall, sort of, and they kiss like that. Okay, now we're on to the burning building scene, which I think the way the book was structured, I think it kind of made it seem that you know, Spider-Man saving Mary Jane, the burning building, and Thanksgiving dinner were all on the same day, perhaps. But during the burning building scene, you know, Spider-Man, he goes into the building to save the baby or whatever, and Peter's mask immediately gets like clogged up by the smoke and whatnot, and so he actually takes his mask off and goes to the kitchen sink in the building and like washes his mask off before saving the kid. And after he hands the lady the baby, he turns to two kids and he wants to say something heroic. So he tells them, you know, don't play with matches, kids. And I noticed that this version, you know, in the book doesn't have the line, "I'm not coming back, Chief," when the police come up to him, and he says, "I'm not coming back, Chief," which I'm honestly wondering in the movie. Like, I'm curious, like where, like what Spider-Man meant by that, like what exactly would the people on the ground have thought when Peter goes up to the building but doesn't come back? But like here, when Peter confronts the Goblin in the burning building, instead of like having like some big jump scare, the Goblin just says, "Is it wrong to lighten up the world?" Which is, like I said, an attempt at some sort of joke, basically. And oh yeah, he has that line, you know, "You're pathetically predictable, like a moth to the flame." And but here there's an addition: "You should be Mothman, not Spider-Man." And this might be kind of a comment on the Japanese version, but for "Are you in or are you out?" The Japanese version basically says, you know, "Will you join me or will you be erased?" And then Spider-Man replies, "It's you that'll be erased, Gabi. forever. It's like basically a literal translation of how the Japanese version handle it. And then we have a Thanksgiving dinner. So here we have when Mary Jane is like about to leave because like she heard Norman kind of slagging her off. She basically makes a comment, like everybody heard that creep, and then like he reminded me of my own father, which is quite sad. And the way they handled that creep in the Japanese version, Mary Jane calls Norman. She calls him basically that man. She calls him ano otoko, basically that man, which in Japanese just kind of referring to someone as like man or woman like that can be a bit rude. So like it can kind of give across that negative nuance. And I just kind of this isn't really specific to the novel here, but just kind of the observation that Mary Jane and other people referring to Aunt May as Aunt May, it is kind of a weird thing when you think about it, like because she's not their aunt. Kind of a weird thing, but it's a weird thing that I noticed. Next up, after Mary Jane leaves, Peter runs outside, and there's a little scene of him trying to like cheer her up. I don't really have anything specific, I just kind of made note of that. And then for number 50, I guess before bed, Aunt May reminisces about. I guess I get kind of funny how I'll just talk about how like it is kind of weird that Mary Jane calls her Aunt May, but then I called her Aunt May. But Aunt May like reminisces about her life with Uncle Ben, and talks about how Uncle Ben's mother hated Aunt May, and she regrets that she didn't kind of use that little bit of information to try to console Mary Jane for not being liked by Norman. And then when the goblin attacks, it's mentioned that the rattling walls give her flashbacks of being a nurse in World War II, which is kind of interesting. And when Goblin, after Aunt May finishes her prayer, after Goblin's like, finish it. After she finally finishes it, the Goblin says, "Amen, sister." It was pretty funny. And then at the hospital, it's mentioned that Mary Jane's the one who called the police after Aunt May was arrested, or not arrested, but attacked, was none other than Mary Jane's mother. Like even she gets a role. Like I don't really think she was featured in the movie at all. And then during at the hospital, when visiting hours are over, the nurses and doctors are trying to get Peter to leave Aunt May's room, but Peter will not budge. And they consider getting the police involved, but eventually just decide to let Peter stay. Okay, then there's the scene where I think Peter or Harry returns to Norman after I guess seeing May and or not May, but Mary Jane and Peter holding hands, and so there's a bit where Norman basically says Parker, and Harry immediately thinks of pickled peppers, and is like, it's like what happens is like Harry mentions Peter, and then Norman's like Parker, and then Harry wants to say, Harry holds back the urge to say, no, duh. I mean Peter Piper, and considers doing the tongue twister, but does not, because he doesn't want to make his father angry. And at the hospital, when Peter like kind of falls asleep on Aunt May's lap, sort of like he kind of like falls asleep beside her, like leaning against her. It talks about how he's dreaming of swinging through a crimeless New York without a mask. It's kind of a sweet little thing. In the movie, you have the line where Aunt May's kind of teasing Peter, basically saying, when you were a child, when they moved next door, you came to me and we were all like, Aunt May, is that an angel? And Peter says, did I really say that? But in the movie, it always seemed like a very sincere comment, but here it's a very clearly sarcastic, because like it's like mentioned, like, Peter had heard this story from Aunt May 100 times. Okay, here, when the Green Goblin calls the hospital, I guess that's how that happens. In the movie, Peter picks up, the Goblin's like, can Spider-Man come out to play? Whatever. But here, there's actually a little bit more dialogue, where the Goblin, I guess, quotes the poet E.E. Cummings and says, be a little more careful of love than anything. And Peter replies, I feel bad for E.E. Cummings to be quoted by you. And then when Mary Jane wakes up on the Queensboro Bridge, she realizes where she is, and she has a flashback. She remembers the Simon and Garfunkel song "Feeling Groovy," which I guess they wrote when they wrote when they were stuck on a traffic jam on the Queensboro Bridge. But then she quickly snaps back to reality and like forgets all about the song. I have this for number 60. Okay, so here's something where I think the Japanese version had to make a little bit of a change that kind of makes some stuff make a little less sense. So in the English version, in the movie, Goblin says, Goblin gives Peter an ultimatum. He says, let die the woman you love, or suffer the little children. Where suffer the little children, is a Bible reference where Jesus, I guess, says that, in the context of let children, don't forbid children for coming to me or whatever. But I guess because when you say that in English, suffer here, suffer the little children, originally basically meant like to tolerate the little children, let them come to me. But I guess because we typically wouldn't use suffer in that way, it's kind of like a double entendre where suffer the little children, like make them suffer or something. Because the way the Japanese translator handled it is, instead of saying suffer the little children, he says what literally translates to let die the woman you love, or watch the little brats die. And after that line, the Goblin says, so before Goblin was Cummings, but now he's Jesus Christ, which makes sense in the context of the English version where he literally quotes Jesus, but not much here where obviously I would hope that Jesus wasn't saying watch the little brats die. I have here that Mary Jane, or when Peter in the movie, there's kind of this whole sequence where Peter lowers Mary Jane and the tram onto like a big barge of that's in the river. But here I think it's implied that like he just lets them down into like a giant boulder, or rock in the river. But here this isn't really a difference or anything, between the novel and the movie. But this is something that reading the book actually helped me realize something. Where in the final battle, is set in this abandoned building where, as a kid, I never really questioned what that building was. But it turns out that building is the Roosevelt Island Smallpox Hospital, which is actually a real building, and to my understanding, it basically is abandoned and in ruin, or like in some state of disarray or whatever. Which it's kind of interesting to know that that actually, that random abandoned building actually has some context behind it. So in the movie, the Green Goblin, he surrenders, he shouts out, Peter, stop! And takes his mask off. But here, the Goblin actually unmasks himself. No, Peter unmasks Goblin himself, should I say. Peter takes Goblin's mask off, and then Goblin interjects and says, Peter. Not really a difference here, but I just wanted to note that Godspeed, Spider-Man. In the Japanese version, he says, Kore demo kurae, Spider-Man. Which, basically just like, eat this, Spider-Man. Which I thought that was kind of cool. And, before the funeral scene, Mary Jane basically tells her father that her old daughter is dead. Like she died on the bridge. She basically says, I'm done with you, and because I've seen someone who can stand up to evil and be strong. So Spider-Man, I guess, gave her the courage to be strong or whatever. While they're at the graveyard, Peter gets the weird feeling like he's about to hear Norman's laughing voice coming from the graveyard. And Harry apologizes to Peter for dating Mary Jane. He basically just says, hey, I was just trying to make my father proud by dating a beautiful girl. And then when Mary Jane and Peter are talking, Mary Jane actually mentions that she listened to Peter's voicemail from the hospital. When Peter talks and it's all like, don't go down any dark alleys. And she should actually listen to that voicemail. And then she mentions that, and that's what prompts her to, go into that whole, when I was up there and I thought I was gonna die speech. It's kind of sweet. And then after the graveyard scene, we have another scene that's not in the movie, and this is at the Daily Bugle. Everybody's looking for Peter. I want Parker. JJJ's all like, I want Parker, and everyone's looking for Peter. But they managed to find his clothes in the closet, in the storage closet or whatever, which implying that he was switching out, I guess, using it to storage clothes while he does stuff with Spider-Man or something like that. And it's JJJ's birthday, and Betty Brock gives him a flower, and JJJ's like, what do you want, a raise? I don't want flowers, I want Parker, and I don't want not his pants. And then there's a very brief moment where when JJJ's alone, he kind of acknowledges to himself that he's actually a little bit jealous of Spider-Man. And then the book ends with one final letter to Peter's parents, which is kind of sweet. And so the way I've written these notes, I've numbered them as there being 71, but I think in actuality there are quite a few more, maybe closer to 80 or so, but my numbering scheme has 71. Yeah, those are the big ones that I at least made note of, because the thing is, I watched that movie so much as a kid. I feel like I can almost remember, the whole movie just from memory. And so I actually read this book quite a while ago, quite a few months ago. But because the notes that I had taken originally were so vague, like I basically just had like for the whole Norman and Osborn and Norman and JJJ sequence, I basically I just put Norman JJJ scene. I didn't actually like make any detailed notes, so I had no idea. Looking back at my notes, like what the heck is this even referring to? So I basically had to like go back at some point and kind of like go back through each note and actually like make more detailed notes and whatnot, which is kind of like why I put off making the video until now. But I'm glad I finally got around to it. Hopefully you guys thought this was interesting, and if so, maybe I'll get around to doing the second book as well sometime, which I have not read at this point, but it could be fun. But till next time, I hope you guys enjoyed, and Liquid out.